Here's an example of the Kaba web clock. And for the purpose of today's training, we're going to be focusing on these three buttons over here on the right-hand side, which are specific for HR. And they should be somewhat self-explanatory because the data we're capturing in HR is relatively simple. The first button here obviously allows employees to clock in. So when employees arrive at work, they're going to use that button to say, hey, I'm here. The second button is for employees to clock out. So when they're leaving the plant, they're going to use that button to clock out. This final button is for clocking in with a reason. And currently we only have a few reasons defined. One is for training, one is for safety training. And if you're at a union plant, there's some reasons for union time. So the purpose of this button is to allow employees to classify their time towards training or safety training or union time if they're doing one of those activities. So if they happen to be doing that, they'll want to clock in, select the appropriate reason from the drop down that appears. And when they're done with that activity, they'll want to clock out and then use the clock in button to clock in as if they're doing normal work. And that will tell the system, hey, from this time to this time I was doing training or I was doing union time, and then I clocked out of that, and for the rest of the day I spent doing my normal working activities. And the reason for that is those payments differ in the finance side, so money gets routed to different accounts based on training or regular work. So that's the three simple buttons that we'll be using for HR. I'll just mention over here on the left side, these buttons are specific for production. So once your employees have clocked in, they're going to use these buttons over here to clock on and off of activities that they're working on throughout the day. So this is the web clock. In addition to the web clock, some locations that were on Kaba prior to moving on to Optimus also have physical clocks. So if you're in one of those locations, you have a clock that looks similar to this screenshot here. And you'll notice on this screenshot, the clock has the exact same buttons that we saw on the web clock. So they can clock in, they can clock out, and they can clock in with a reason code. And those buttons will function exactly the same way as they do in the web clock and should be used for the same purposes. You'll notice in this folder here, there's also the PPPS functions, which are those same buttons you saw on the web clock for clocking on and off of activities throughout the day. Okay, so now that we understand how the clocks look, let's go over an overall process flow for how the clock data is processed within SAP and Kaba. Okay, so this diagram shows here you have your shop floor employees who will be clocking in and out of the plant every day, and they'll be clocking on and off of activities throughout the day as they're moving from one thing to the next. They're going to record those clock punches at the Kaba clock if they have a physical clock, or on the Kaba web clocks. Probably most people will be using the Kaba web clocks throughout the day. Now every punch that they make on those clocks gets recorded in a Kaba database which sits outside of SAP. Now there's programs that run between the Kaba database and SAP that pull information out of HR to push new employees into the database. And it also pulls information out of PP to get production activity information into the database and available for employees to use. So one thing to know is if you have an employee who can't clock in, he's a new employee, it's going to be because if the employee wasn't entered into SAP or wasn't entered properly, that data hasn't flown from SAP into the Kaba database to make it available for them to clock in. Also, same goes with production. If certain activities aren't created, the data all comes from SAP, so in order for it to be at the clock for employees to use, it has to first be in SAP and it be in there correctly. So as you can see, that's the arrow going this way. When the punches are recorded in the database every 15 minutes, there's also arrows going this way that push the data out of the Kaba database and into SAP HR and the SAP PP modules. So what's coming into SAP HR is the punches in and out. So the right side of the clock that we discussed, where employees will be clocking in, clocking out, or clocking in with a reason, all those punches get pushed across into SAP HR. Now, as they're clocking on and off of activities throughout the day, that information is collected and it's also pushed into the SAP production module. So all of that data is separate. The production goes into SAP production and the HR time goes into SAP HR, and it sits separately on the SAP side. So what we're focusing on today is SAP HR. So down here you'll see once the data is in SAP HR, it goes through a process called time evaluation. And what time evaluation does is it takes the employee clock data, it takes their master data, including their schedule, who they are, where they are, etc., their different scenarios, and it puts all that data together, runs it through a bunch of rules that produce messages and also produce data that gets passed to payroll for payment. So there's a tool that everyone taking this training will be using and what we're focusing on today called Time Manager's Workplace. And what Time Manager's Workplace does is it allows supervisors to access SAP and see the data in an organized fashion, both the messaging that's coming out of SAP Time Evaluation here and the HR data that's stored in SAP HR. So it allows supervisors to view that data, edit that data, process the messages, correct the data, create the data if necessary, and handle everything from start to finish in the payroll period to make sure employees are paid appropriately. Okay, one more topic I'd like to discuss before we get into Time Manager's Workplace in detail is work schedules in SAP. And work schedules in SAP, in particular for clock employees, are very important because they control several key factors. The first of which is the shift premiums. So if you're at a location that has multiple shifts, and some of those shifts are paid a premium, for example, a night shift, then it's important that employees are assigned to the appropriate schedule because that's what controls whether the employee will get the premium or not. So as a quick example, if you have an employee who's on the night shift, but you actually have him assigned to the day shift, even though he's coming in on the night shift schedule, he would not be paid the premium because his work schedule says he's on the day shift. Same goes for the opposite scenario. If you have an employee who's actually working the day shift, but you've assigned him to the night shift, that employee would be paid the night shift premium even though he's clocking in the middle of the day. So it's not when they clock in that defines the premiums, it's the schedule you have them assigned to. The next key factor is lunch breaks, and most locations have requested to have auto-deducted lunch breaks. This means that the schedule defines from time A to time B is the lunch break and the duration, and that amount of time should be reduced from the amount of time that's to be paid to the employee. So this means if the employee is assigned to the wrong shift, there's a chance that the lunch break could be deducted incorrectly or not at all. For example, if you had an employee who's on the night shift, but you've actually assigned him to the day shift, the schedule may say that his lunch break is at noon, but since he's working in the middle of the night and not at noon, that lunch break would never be deducted. So if the employee's working a 10-hour day with a 30-minute lunch, instead of getting paid for 9.5 hours every day, he'd be getting paid for 10. Now, one last thing to clear up here, because there's been some confusion around this, and I just want to make sure that we go over it, is for HR, employees who are on auto-deducted lunch break schedules, which is most schedules, they should not clock out for their lunch or for their paid breaks. And the only time you'd have people doing that from an HR perspective is if they're on a schedule that doesn't have the auto-deducted lunch breaks. Now, from a production perspective, we may want employees to clock off and on activities whenever they're taking a break or going to lunch. And that's just to say, okay, during this time, the employee is not working on that activity. But from an HR perspective, those buttons on the right side of the clock, which we went over already for the clock in, clock out, and clock in with reason, those buttons are not necessary for lunch breaks or breaks as long as the employee is on a schedule that has an auto-deducted lunch break. Okay, so the final couple things that are controlled by the schedule is rounding and messaging. So clock punches are rounded in all locations within 6 minutes of the scheduled start and end times. So this means if you have an employee who's scheduled to work at 6 a.m., if he comes in between 5:54 and 6:06 in the morning, the system's going to record the actual clock punch, but when it goes to pay him, it's going to pay him as if he was there exactly at 6. So it's important both coming in and out that the employee's on the right schedule so the rounding works correctly. Also, the system tracks when employees are tardy or when they're leaving early, which we'll get into in a little more detail here in a minute. But it's important that the employee is on the right schedule if you want to be able to report on how many times has this employee been late to work, or how many times is he cutting out early. Finally, there's also several messages that hinge on the schedule. For instance, both late and early, as I just discussed, and also if the employee comes in early. So if you have an employee who's scheduled to work at 8 based on the schedule defined in SAP, but he's actually coming in at 6 every day, you're going to be pretty annoyed because you're going to get a message that says employee has arrived early every single day. So in order to avoid that scenario, you'd want to assign that employee to a schedule that starts at 6, not 8. This illustration is designed to explain exactly how the system behaves with respect to the employee's scheduled start and end times. So over here, we'll start with this. Here's the employee's scheduled start time. Now, what we hope most employees, or all employees, will do on a daily basis is be within this green window right here, which represents within 6 minutes of the scheduled start and prior to the scheduled start. So if an employee clocks in within that 6-minute window, the system will record the punch exactly as is, so you'll see exactly the time the employee got there. However, when it evaluates that time, it's going to round it off as if the employee was there exactly at the scheduled time and pay him in full from the scheduled start. Now you'll notice there's this blue window, which is prior to the 6 minutes. Now if the employee is more than 6 minutes early, the system is going to generate a message indicating to you, the supervisor, that your employees arrived early. Now the reason for this is we found that several employees in certain locations will come in and they'll clock in 10, 20 minutes early and they'll have a cup of coffee. They're not actually working. And then when their scheduled start time comes around, they'll go ahead and start working. Now what we don't want to do is be paying employees for a time that they're not actually working. And I think this scenario is due to things that have happened in the past and the way things were. And hopefully it's not something that needs to be continued with Optimus and the number of web clocks that you have in your location. So hopefully people won't be falling in this category unless they're actually there early. But we have this message there to indicate that, hey, this could be the scenario. So you want to check, why is this employee early? And if he isn't actually working, then you'll want to adjust that scheduled start time so he doesn't get paid any additional time. Now, if he is early and he's actually working, then you can just adjust his scheduled start time to make the message go away. And we'll go through that in detail when we get into Time Manager's Workplace. Now, the next section I want to look at here is this yellow section. Now, this is where the employee is still going to be paid in full because he's still within the 6 minutes of his scheduled start time, but he's late. So what happens here is the system will record the punch exactly as it is. When it evaluates it, it'll pay him in full as if he was there at exactly his scheduled start time. But it's going to track both the number of times this happens and the number of minutes that it happened for. So you can report over any time period how many times has this guy been late, and how many minutes does that account for. So you know exactly who's kind of taking advantage of that 6-minute window and how much it's costing you in time over any given period of time. Now the next section here is this orange section, which is where the employee is now no longer getting paid in full because he's outside of the 6-minute window and he's less than 15 minutes late. And we're calling this a tardy. So this is, again, between 6 and 15 minutes after the scheduled start time. And in this case, the employee is going to start losing pay, and the system is going to be tracking, again, how many times this occurred and how many minutes. And these are two separate buckets, so when you report, you can see the employee was late this many times and the employee was tardy this many times, and this is how many minutes it's cost us in both scenarios. Now the next section here is this red section, and this is where the employee is more than 15 minutes off his scheduled start and he's late or tardy. So in this case, the system is assuming that either the employee was absent for some reason or the employee was asked to come in late, and you're going to adjust his schedule. So it's putting out a message indicating the employee is excessively late and it expects you to either enter an appropriate absence, be it excused or unexcused, or adjust the employee's schedule time. So we'll go through exactly how you'll handle those messages, but just know once the employee is more than 15 minutes late, it's going to start generating messages and expect you to handle that situation. Now here quickly, I've indicated that the employee has an auto-deducted lunch break. And this is the case in almost all of the plants that we have and almost all of the schedules we have defined as well. So what happens here is pretty obvious. If the employee is clocked in over the defined lunch break, the system's automatically going to remove that time when it evaluates it, and it's not going to pay for whatever that duration is. Okay, so over here we have the scheduled end time, and this is basically the inverse of what we just went through on the scheduled start time, with a little bit of a twist over here. You'll notice there's no blue section. So starting here on the red, if the employee is more than 15 minutes before his scheduled end time and he's leaving, the system's going to again put out a message telling you that the employee left excessively early, and it's going to expect you to either enter an absence or adjust his scheduled time to reflect what you told him to work on that day. Now, if he's in this orange section, he's within 15 minutes and over 6 minutes before his scheduled end time. So in this case, the system tracks that as a left early, and it again tracks the number of occurrences and the number of minutes for you to report on, and the employee is not going to get paid for that time. So it's going to actually affect his pay for the week. Now the yellow section, this again is the same. He's now within the 6-minute window, but he's leaving before he's supposed to. It's going to track this as a before time, and again it counts the number of occurrences and the number of minutes, so you can report to find out who's falling into this category and how much it's costing you. Now finally, again, you have this green section, which is where we hope employees to be on a consistent basis, which is they're leaving within 6 minutes just after their scheduled end time, and they're doing what we'd expect them to do. Again, there'll be no message. It's going to record the actual punch, and it's going to pay them as if he left exactly on time. Now again, you notice there's no blue section here, and that's because we find employees work fairly consistently past their scheduled end time for purposes that are valid. So we don't want to be bothering supervisors with a message every time that occurs. We do have you validating the number of hours that they worked every week. So rather than bother you with a message, we're just having you validate the number of hours. And obviously, if it's over the 40 or 50 hours they're scheduled to work that week, then it should be apparent that he's working extra time. Okay, now I'd like to talk about how we get to Time Manager's Workplace from within the SAP portal. So you'll notice on my screen I have Internet Explorer up, and this is my default home page, which should look similar to yours. And you'll notice it's on My Home. Up here, there's also the My Job folder, which is where we're going to be looking for Time Manager's Workplace. So I'm going to click that folder. Okay, so now you'll notice it gives me some subfolders: My Transactions, Common IT Transactions, which you may not have, My Reports, My SAP, and SAP User Profile. Now once My Transactions comes up, which is the default subfolder, which is the one we'll be using today, I want to look for Time Manager's Workplace. You'll notice my list of transactions is extremely long. Most of you won't have nearly the number of transactions I have in this client, so hopefully it'll be easy for you to find Time Manager's Workplace. But if you can't, you can use Control F, and it'll bring up a search window for you. And in that window, I can type PTMW, and that's the transaction, and it's found it here for me. So I'm going to go ahead and click Time Manager's Workplace. Okay, here's Time Manager's Workplace. I'm going to go ahead and click this full screen button, which I recommend doing to give yourself more room to view, because there's quite a bit of detail on this screen. Okay, so here's the full screen view, and we're ready to go and use Time Manager's Workplace. Okay, before we discuss what we see here in Time Manager's Workplace, I want to talk about how your employees are defaulted into your view. So if you're a user of Time Manager's Workplace, it means two things. One, that you're a manager, and two, that you're managing employees who are using the Kaba clock. So you will not see employees in Time Manager's Workplace who are not on the clock. So if you're also managing employees who are using timesheets, whether they're hourly or salaried non-exempt, you won't see those employees here. They'll be submitting time through a different process, which is a separate piece of training. What you will see here again is just your Kaba hourly employees who are using the Kaba clocks. The way you see your specific list of employees is SAP knows based on your user ID what your employee number is. So SAP has to have your user ID appropriately linked to your employee number. Now, if someone has done that incorrectly, then you could have a problem. So if you're not seeing any employees or you're seeing completely the wrong employees, that could be one issue. Now, once your employee number is linked directly to your user ID correctly, then SAP can know based on your employee number what org units you're the chief of. It could be multiple, it could be one. So by looking at those relationships, it's determining what org units you're responsible for. Obviously, if you don't have the appropriate relationships, that could be another issue, resulting in you seeing either wrong employees or missing your employees completely. So once SAP has determined what org units you're responsible for, it then looks at the employees assigned to those org units and it pulls them into your view. So if everything's set up correctly, SAP should go from your user ID to your employee number to the org units you're responsible for and pull in the employees who are Kaba clock employees that are assigned to those org units. Now, if any one of those links is out of place, then it could result in you seeing a range of things from nothing up to a bunch of employees you're not responsible for and anything in between. Okay, let's start by going over what you'll see when you come into Time Manager's Workplace. So there's two views in Time Manager's Workplace, and the default view is the message processing view. And you can see here the message processing view at the top of the screen. Now let's start over here with the calendar, which is a little bit unusual compared to a calendar you'd normally see. So what you can see here is you have the months going across the top along with the year. And down the left-hand side here, you have Monday through Sunday. And these numbers over here represent the number of the week. So for instance, today, which is always highlighted with a square, is October 12th, 2011, which is in the 41st week of the year. Now what you have down here is a list of messages for your employees that have been categorized into 4 separate categories. The top category is errors. These are things that are hard errors which are stopping your employees from being evaluated, and therefore, if you weren't to correct them, would stop the employee from getting paid past the date of the error. The next category is action required, which is working time order violations. And these are going to be warnings, but a lot of them are things you need to handle. So for instance, if you have an employee who's not at work, that would be in here. If you have an employee who's excessively late or has left excessively early and the system thinks he's severely off his schedule and wants to make sure that you don't need to handle it with either a partial day absence or by adjusting his schedule, those types of things will be found in this level 2 folder. Level 3 is warning. So most of these you'll be confirming messages, which you'll see in a minute, but it'll be the employee's working off schedule most of the time. So for instance, he's at work on a holiday, or he's at work on the weekend, or any day that's an unscheduled day. You're going to get a message for that, and the system just wants to confirm that you expect that employee to be there on that day that isn't normally scheduled. And level 4 is confirmations. So in this folder, you're going to just have one message, and it comes out every Sunday for your employees, and it has the number of hours that they've worked for the week, and it's just asking you to confirm, okay, this employee worked this many hours. Now over here, you have 3 separate tabs. So you can see the default tab is a calendar view. And this calendar view shows you the employee's scheduled time and how many hours he's scheduled for. And if he's clocked in on that day, it'll have the time pair listed here. Also, if it were a holiday or the employee was absent, it'll show you that as well. So if he's absent, the absence you've entered would show up in these fields here. So if he was sick unpaid, this square right here would say sick unpaid. Now, if it's a holiday, instead of having the day of the week with the date up here, it's going to have a holiday. So if I can click on, let's find a holiday here real quick. Okay, so here we see if it's a holiday, it shows Labor Day in this case, which is September 5th in 2011. So if it's a holiday, you'll see that there. Now this next tab is the time data tab. Okay, so what we can see on the time data tab here is it has their scheduled time. It also has the time pairs. You notice these time pairs are grayed out, so I can't edit the time pair data. That's on the time events tab, which we'll get to in a minute. But you'll notice the schedule times are available for edit since they're in these white cubes. So I can click into there and I can change the schedule time, and that's actually what you'll do, and we'll get to that in a minute in cases where it makes sense. Now you'll also notice there's these free spaces here, and this is where you can enter an absence. So if this employee didn't have this time pair today, or he had showed up late and I wanted to enter a partial day absence, I can do a drop down on this field, and that's where I can enter an absence. So the time data tab gives you a nice overview of the schedule compared to the time the employees worked that day, and it also allows you to enter absences and change their work schedule. Now the last tab is this time events tab. Okay, so on the time events tab, you'll see all you have is clock punches, and they're broken out as in and outs. So in this case, this employee clocked in on Monday 10/3 at 4 o'clock, and he clocked out on Monday 10/3 at 12:30. Now one other thing I'd like to show you is by default this is in the message view, which you can see I said there's this message processing view, and we're also within this view looking at the message view, which has just these messages listed here. However, I can click this employee view. Okay, so you'll notice with this employee view, instead of a list of messages by category, it gives me a list of employees. So if I would like to, instead of doing messages by category, I can do one employee at a time and handle all of the messages that that employee has. So you're fine to do either way. In this training, I'll go through it in the message view because that's the default, and I think that's probably the better way to do it. But you could do it either way, and either way works fine. It's just whichever way you think suits you. Okay, I'm going to flip this back to the message view, and we're going to go through how to handle the messages that are here in Time Manager's Workplace. Now, you should be coming into Time Manager's Workplace, if not on a daily basis, hopefully every few days, and definitely on the Monday morning of a payroll week to make sure that all of your employees' messages have been handled prior to payroll running. If you don't do that, you're going to start getting emails from the payroll department, and there's a chance that your employees either won't get paid at all or they'll get paid incorrectly, and we'll have a bunch of issues. So it's important that you're handling these messages on a somewhat regular basis to make sure they're not adding up on you and leaving you on a payroll Monday with a huge list of things to take care of, and potentially things that you have issues with that you can't get done in time for them to get paid. Okay, so as discussed in the message view, it organizes the messages into 4 separate folders, and the top folder is the error folder, and those are the ones I would suggest handling first. So when you double click on this, which I've already done, it brings up the messages and the employees who have messages in this category. So I can see here there's 2 employees. They have slightly odd names, but one's missing a clock out and one's missing a clock in. So to handle these, the first thing I want to do is double click on the first message. Now you'll notice over here, this message is on October 7th, 2011. And over here, it's automatically highlighted the day of the message and the 2 days on either side of it. Okay, since I know that this is a clock punch error based on the long text right here, I'm going to go straight to the Time Events tab where we know I can edit clock punches. Okay, here on the Time Events tab, I'm going to look on October 7th, the day of the message, and I can see here the guy had a P10, which is his clock in, and then there's no clock out. So in this case, either I know when the employee clocked out, or if I didn't, I'd have to go speak to him and find out. And I'm going to go ahead and enter in the clock out once I have the information. So to do that, I click in this free space. I could also click this button here, and it'll give a drop down which has P10 and P20, and I can select from that drop down. I find it's a lot easier just to type the P20 in there. Then I come over here into the time section, click into that cell, and I'm going to type the time. So let's say it was 12:30. I can type 12:30. Hit enter, and it'll accept that. Okay, one thing to be careful about when entering the clock times the way I did is you can enter it with the colons in the middle, and that'll be fine. If you're going to enter it without the colons, just make sure you use a 4-digit number. So if it was 4 o'clock, I would have had to enter 0400 there, and then it would accept it. So if you're going to enter it without the colons, just make sure you use 4-digit military time. Okay, once I've made that entry, I'm going to go up here to the Save button. I'm going to click Save. Okay, and if I haven't made any errors, I'll see in this section right here, which is your message bar, that the data was saved. Now, if I had made a mistake, there might be a red icon here and an error message indicating that I had entered something incorrectly. So just pay attention to this bar, because if you make errors, then any subsequent changes you make after that may not get saved. So just pay attention to this bar after every change you make and save. All right, so now since I've made a change, I want the system to reevaluate this employee's time to see if he has any other errors. So I'm going to click this time evaluation button, and you should do this after saving any change you make. So when I click time evaluation, it's going to reprocess the employee's time. Okay, now time evaluation is finished, and we can see the message that was there is now dropped off. So that means that I've done the correct thing. So we're going to move on to the next message. Again, I'm going to double click on it. Okay, so now I'm still on the time events tab, and I can see here on the 6th, the day that it's pointing to, I have a clock out, but there's no clock in. So again, I would have to get the information from the employee. Once I had it, I would come in here. I'm going to enter my P10 in this case for clock in. And then let's say he was here at 5 o'clock. I'm going to enter my 0500. And hit enter. And just make sure that it populates correctly. Okay, it looks good. I'm going to save again. Once I've saved, I'm going to check my error message bar again, and everything looks good. It says data's been saved, and I have my good green check there. So now I'm ready to go ahead and run time evaluation again. Now I could have done both of these changes, save them, and then run time evaluation. That's fine if you're going to do a couple of changes at once, that's okay. I would be a little hesitant to do too many at once, because if you make a mistake, it might be hard to backtrack and figure out what the mistake was. So I wouldn't do more than 2 or 3 at a time until you're really good at this. Okay, so now that we've corrected the errors we had, you'll notice in the message section over here, the number 1 error folder has dropped off, and now we're on to our number 2s. So in the number 2s, these aren't hard errors preventing employees from getting paid past that date, because the system will run through these errors, or warnings, that is what they really are. But it could affect the employee's pay, and it could also affect how they look on tardy reports and things of that nature. So we want to definitely pay close attention to these, make sure we get them cleaned up appropriately. So the first one here is an employee who on 10/4 was left excessively early. So I find it's easiest to go to the time data tab for this type of message. Okay, on the time data tab, you can see both the employee's scheduled time and their time pair on each day. So in this case, again, we're looking at October 4th, and we can see here the employee's scheduled to work from 5 to 14:30. He came in at 5, which is on time, but he left at 13:45, which happens to be 45 minutes early. So in this case, assuming I asked the employee to leave 45 minutes early that day because we had no work or something to that effect, I could come in here and just change his schedule on the day to say, yep, that's the schedule that he was supposed to work that day. So to do that, I'm going to click in here on the end time of the schedule. I'm going to delete out the 14:30. I'm going to type in 13:45. And then I'm going to hit enter. Okay, and we'll notice it's taken it and it's changed his schedule from a 9-hour day to an 8.25-hour day. So if I'm satisfied with this, I'm going to go up and I'm going to click the save button. Okay, and then we'll check our data error bar here, and we'll see that the data was saved. So it looks like I'm good to go. I'm going to go ahead and run time evaluation, so the system will reevaluate his data based on the changes I've made. Okay, once time evaluation runs successfully, we can see the message for the employee leaving excessively early is dropped off, and we're on to the next one, which is for this employee on October 6th. He's not at work. And this could mean that the employee didn't clock in and out for the entire day, but that's very unlikely because if that was the case, he wouldn't be able to clock on and off activities throughout the day because they must be clocked in order to do that. So most likely this means the employee is not at work, and hopefully by the time you're getting this message, you know why he's not at work. So if that's the case, I'm going to come down to the time data tab. I'm going to look at October 6th, and I can see here he has a schedule, but he was not here on this day. There's no time pair. So if I want to enter an absence, I'm going to come to this space here underneath the plan time, this free white space, and I'm going to do the drop down here using this little button to the right. Okay, once the window comes up, I'll see my list of possible absence codes, and I would go ahead and pick the appropriate one. Let's just say, in this case, the employee had jury duty, and he told me in advance, and I just hadn't gotten around to entering it. I'm going to double click on jury duty. Okay, we'll see it's put the 4-digit code for jury duty in here. If I hit enter, it will populate the full text, and we'll see it has a default of 8 hours. Now, if this was a partial day absence, which we'll get to in a minute, I'd have to enter some clock times in here to indicate the times that the employee was absent. You'll also notice that if this case, this employee has an 8-hour schedule, but if he was on a 10 or a 9-hour schedule, something greater than 8, it would automatically adjust the employee's start and end times and make it an 8-hour day. And you can see here it actually adjusted the end time because in this case it's removing the break from the day because the employee's not going to have a break. He's just 8 hours of paid jury duty. Okay, so once I've entered that, again, I'm going to go up here and click my save button. Okay, and so once I save, again, I'm going to check my error message tab here to make sure nothing's out of place and everything looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and run time evaluation to reevaluate the time data with the changes I've made. Okay, once time evaluation completes successfully, we'll notice that the employee is not at work message has dropped off and it's moved on to the next message in the folder, which is employee is excessively late on October 4th. So with this message, I'm going to go to my time data tab, which I already have up here. I'm going to look on October 4th and see that his schedule is from 14:30 till 2 in the morning. And he has a time pair from 15:30 to 2 in the morning. So this looks like he was 1 hour late. Now this could be, again, several different reasons. Either number one, I told him to come in late and then I would change the schedule, which we've already seen me do. Or he forgot to clock in and then he ended up clocking in at 15:30 and told me that he was actually here earlier, in which case I would go to the time events tab and I'm going to find the in punch on the 4th and I'm going to change it from 15:30 to 14:30 or whatever it actually was. In this case, I'm going to assume that the employee was actually an hour late for work for some reason, and I'm going to assign an absence. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to this free space on 10.4 underneath the time pair. I'm going to click into it. Then I'm going to click into this drop-down button next to it. Okay, then my drop-down is going to bring up this menu where I can see all my absences, which we've already seen as well. And in this case, I'm going to say he was unexcused unpaid. So I'm going to come down to the bottom here, unexcused unpaid. Now I'm going to double click that absence. Okay, so we'll see it puts the 4-digit code in here. And again, if I hit enter. Okay, so now we see that it has the full text in there and it defaults it to the 8 hours, which is not what we want in this case. Obviously, we only want to put in the 1 hour. So we're going to enter the 1 hour of time in here. So we have to enter the start and end time. So I'm going to click into the start time. In this case, from 14:30 is my start time. I'm going to click into the end time here. I'm going to type my 15:30. Now I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so now I can see here that he was scheduled to work from 14:30 to 2 in the morning. I've said from 14:30 to 15:30 he was unexcused unpaid. And then from 15:30 to 2 in the morning he was clocked in. Now if I want to type some text to go along with this absence, I can put in here this inf type text. I can type whatever I want. So let's just say he overslept in this case. Okay, so once I'm satisfied with that, I'm going to go up and I'm going to save. Okay, so once it's saved, I'm again going to go here and run time evaluation because I want it to reevaluate the data that I've entered. Okay, when time evaluation completes, we can see here time evaluation successfully completed, and we notice that the message we have for the employee being excessively late has now dropped off, and we've moved on to the next message. And in this case, we've actually closed out our level 2 messages and it's moved on to our level 3s. So the level 3s are warnings, and in most cases you're just going to be reviewing the message. The system's just spitting something out to tell you, hey, this happened, something's out of the normal schedule, and it just wants you to confirm it. So there are some cases, especially these employee arrived early messages, where you may have to make some adjustments, but for the most part you're just going to be doing confirmations. So let's start with this first one here, which is at work despite a holiday. So in this case we have this employee here on Labor Day, September 5th. This employee was at work although it was a holiday. So as long as we expected that employee to be at work, then we're going to be okay with this. And obviously it's probably not going to be very common that someone would be clocking in on a holiday if they weren't supposed to be at work, but if that ever did happen, you'd want to talk to your employee about it. But in this case, let's just assume I knew he was going to be at work on the holiday and I'm okay with it. So what I can do is I can click this status button right here for that employee. Okay, and when I do that, this check mark will appear in the status column, which shows that I've checked it off. And then I can come to this button here, confirm messages completed. And when I click that button, it'll drop the message out of my view. So I just confirmed that employee was here on a holiday. I'm okay with it. Confirmed, it goes away. Now it brings up the next one, which is this employee has arrived early. So this is for this employee on October 3rd. So I can look down here. I'm already on the time data tab. I can see his schedule is at 4. He arrived at 3:40. So in this case, let's say I talked to him and he had just come in, had a cup of coffee. He wasn't actually working until 4. I'm going to tell him, hey, next time let's just clock in on time and stop doing that, hopefully, so that I don't have to deal with these messages every day. And I'm going to go to the time events tab to correct this clock punch, because you notice on the time data tab here, since these are grayed out, I can't correct the time punches on this tab. I have to be on the time events tab. So I'm going to go there by clicking time events. Okay, so once I'm on the time events tab, I can see here's October 3rd. He clocked in at 3:40, and I want to tell the system, well, he actually clocked in at 4. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to click into this cell. I'm going to take out the 3:40. I'm going to replace it with 4 o'clock. Okay, once I've entered my 4 o'clock, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click save as usual. Anytime I make a change, I'm going to save it. Okay, once it saves, I can see my status bar here to make sure I haven't made any errors. It says that it was saved, which is a good thing. I'm going to go to my time evaluation button and push that. Once time evaluation completes successfully, we get the message that it was successful, and you'll notice that employee arrived early message has dropped off and it moved on to the next one, which in this case is the employees at work on an unscheduled day. So most of the time this is going to be the employees working on a weekend. Some locations do have 4-day shifts, so it could be he's working on a Friday, but in any event he's working on an unscheduled day. So again, hopefully anytime someone's working on an unscheduled day, you expected them to be at work. If not, then you'd want to talk to them about that. But most of the time, I assume you're just going to confirm these things. So I can see this is 10/8. That's a Saturday. Assuming I'm okay with this employee had worked on Saturday, knew he was going to work, I might want to check his punch so I can see he worked from 4 to 8, a 4-hour day. If I'm okay with that, I'm going to go ahead and click in this status button. Okay, so once I have the check mark here, I can go ahead up to my confirm messages completed. Click that button. Okay, so once that message is confirmed, we notice it drops out of sight and it moves on to the next messages. In this case, if we look over here, I've also closed out my level 3s and all we have left is our level 4s. So level 4s are for confirming the weekly hours worked. That's the only message you're going to get in this category. And what this is asking you to do is confirm the hours for each of your employees for that week. Now this message only comes out on Sunday of every week, so you're only going to get this on Monday morning when you come into work. In addition, another thing I want to point out quickly is with all of these messages, if you change any piece of data back in time and then you run time evaluation, even if you've confirmed messages, so for instance, let's say last week I confirmed a guy worked 40 hours. Then he came to me and he told me, hey, I actually worked 41 after he got his paycheck. And I went back and made the correction that I had missed. I'm going to have to reconfirm a message for the prior week saying 41 hours now. So just be aware that time evaluation is going to run backwards. It doesn't look to see if the messages have changed or not. The fact that you confirm them is irrelevant. If it runs over that day again, if it was a weekend, it's going to say, okay, here, it's an unscheduled day, confirm it again. So that's the way it works. So if you're seeing messages come back, that's because you're making changes prior to the time the message was there, and therefore you're going to have to confirm that message again. Okay, so moving on with these messages, I can see I have all my employees. They have these odd names. On 10/9, which is Sunday of the prior week, it's asking me to confirm their time. And I can see over here in this column the hours they've worked. Now, a few of these buttons up here are pretty useful. So these two right here are sort. So obviously this one is sort with the smallest number up top, and this is sort with the biggest. And I think one thing you might want to do here is click on this hours work column and then sort either smallest or largest. I'm going to go ahead and sort with the highest number on top. So I'm going to click this sort in descending order. Okay, so now I can see the highest hours up top and going down. So let's say this top guy, he has 54 hours. And what if I was a little bit worried about that and wanted to double check what was going on there? I could come over and I could click on the employee. Okay, so to make sure that I clicked on the right employee, I want to look at this header right here just to make sure I have the right employee selected, which I do right now. But just be careful with that. I've seen people, if you don't double click, it doesn't get it sometimes. So just make sure that you have the right person, otherwise you'll be looking at the wrong information and potentially making edits you shouldn't be making. So in this case, I want to look at his week 40, which is the week ending 10/9. So I'm going to go over to the calendar here. I'm going to click on the 40. Okay, so once it highlights the week, then I'm currently on the time events tab, which I can see is clock punches. This looks to be a night shift guy because he's coming in and then going out the next day, coming in, going out the next day. I'd like the time data tab, so I'm going to go there to get a better view. Okay, so on this tab, I can see his planned time against his time pair. So I can see he works an 11-hour shift, so I probably wouldn't be too concerned because he's really supposed to be working 55 hours a week. It looks like there was this one day where he overslept, which you'll remember I did that a little earlier. I could scroll down to the bottom here and see the rest of the days. Okay, so there's Thursday and Friday. He didn't do any weekend work. So it basically looks like he worked his 55-hour week less the 1 hour that he overslept. So if I'm okay with that, I'm going to go up here to the message. In the status column, I can click in here and it will give me my check mark. Once I have that, I can go to confirm messages completed and confirm that message. Okay, so we can see that message is dropped off now, and I have the rest of them to review. So I could continue doing what I just did where I review each one at a time and check it off and confirm it. That's fine if that's the way you want to do it. Another option is to review all of these. So if I look at this guy, say I know he works a 50-hour week and that's what I expect, I'm not even going to look at his time in detail. The rest of these, if I may look at them in detail, or I may just say, yeah, that's a 40-hour week or that's a 45-hour week, and I remember he missed, a half an hour or 3/4 of an hour here or there. If I'm good with all of these times, I can also use this button right here with the pencil and the check that says all messages completed. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. Okay, and you'll notice when I click it, it puts a check mark in all of these boxes, so I don't have to go one by one and check them all off. Now, you're welcome to do that if that's the way you prefer to do it. And I guess depending on the size of your crew, some people might want to do them all at once. Some people might want to do certain people and then clear them out, etc. So it's all up to how you want to do it. Just know you can either click them one at a time or you can use that button to click them all. Once they're all clicked, I can do this confirm messages completed. Okay, and once I've confirmed the last of my messages, I'll see this screen. You'll notice I have no more messages down here. There's no more employees to process, and it's telling me no messages exist to be processed for selected employees. So this is what I want to see Monday morning by around 10 a.m. in the morning, because payroll is going to start running payroll around that time. And if I don't have my messages cleaned up, I'm going to start getting notifications. And if it's something that becomes a problem, eventually they're going to escalate it to someone above me about me not getting my messages done. So hopefully all of you will be able to handle this and get your messages to this point by a reasonable time on Monday morning. Now, one thing I would suggest before just leaving here is I would always just click save just to make sure that everything's saved. And that's important. You never want to leave here without saving. It's very easy to go and confirm a whole bunch of messages and then just leave. And if you don't save all the things that you've done, then they're just going to come right back the next time you come in. And there's been a lot of questions about that, and I think a lot of it has to do with people saving. So just make sure before you ever leave this transaction, you always click save. And then I would just go so far as to click the time evaluation button as well, just to make sure that nothing that you've changed hasn't been reevaluated and isn't going to go ahead and produce more messages right after it runs. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. Okay, and I can see the message bar here is telling me no employees were selected, and I still have my no messages exist, so I'm good to go. So I can just go ahead and exit. Okay, so now that we understand how to clear messages, I want to talk about how you review your employees' time or answer any employee questions that they may have by looking at the data when there isn't a message to be processed. So as you can see, when I've handled all my messages, I don't see any employees here. I don't see any data. So if someone came to me and asked me a question, you're probably wondering, how do I look at the information? So this is how. So from this screen, which is the message processing view, if we go to menu over here, go to maintain time data. This will take us to a screen that looks very similar to the message processing screen. The big difference here is you'll notice down the left-hand side, I just have my list of employees. So for those of you who are logging into Time Manager's Workplace for the first time, you probably want to go to this view, look at this list, and make sure you see your list of employees and only your employees. And if you don't, then you want to contact someone immediately. Don't wait till Monday of payroll to get that handled. You want to let that be known by opening a ticket or talking to someone who can get that handled for you. Because if you wait till payroll Monday, it might take some time to figure out what the issue is and to get the issues corrected. Now, the second thing you'll notice here is instead of the message section up here, we have this employee data section. So this section allows you to look at some key employee data. So let's go through that real quick. So in this section, first of all, make sure you have the appropriate date selected here. You'll notice it's selected October 20th, which happens to be the day I'm doing this video. If you wanted to look at, the employee data for a specific time, just make sure you pick the time you want to look at. Otherwise, it's going to give you the date that has been picked. And that might not make sense, because if the employee's asking you what happened, 3 weeks ago, then maybe things have changed since then. So you want to pick an appropriate date. So once I have an appropriate date selected, you'll see I can click this blue button here. Okay, and that'll expand the data section and I can see the information. So I'm going to skip this working hour summary for the moment. I'll come back to it. I'm going to go ahead down to quota balance information. And I'm going to guess this is something that your employees probably might ask you about quite often. How much vacation time do I have? How much sick time do I have? Whatever it is. So this tab is pretty simple. You can see when I select it, it gives me their vacation days and the number of vacation days they've used, their sick hours and the number of hours they've used, and their floating holiday days and the number of days they've used. Now, this person hasn't used any of theirs. If they had, this would go down to 9 and this would go up to 1, or this would go down to 8 and this would go up to 2, and so forth. So same with all of these. So it should be pretty self-explanatory. And this is where you would go. Just make sure you first pick the appropriate employee and the appropriate date. Okay, so the next tab you have at your disposal is this planned working time information. Okay, and on this tab, it'll tell you the specifics of the employee's schedule. So you can see this is his work schedule rule, which happens to be a Houston 8-hour day shift, and it's Monday through Sunday. It's 5 work days. It also has 8-hour work schedule. It's 40 hours a week, and this is the average monthly hours. Now you can also see all this information down here on the calendar, which we've already gone over. And so I don't know how often you'll use it, but it's here if this is something you want to use. So the next tab you have is this enterprise structure information. Okay, again, I don't know how often you'll use this, but it does give you some information. So it tells you the location the employee's in, the personal sub area, which is the division that they're working in, their employee group and subgroup, which all of your employees should be regular hourly employees if they're in time manager's workplace, and their company code. We'd also have their cost center, so you might worry about that if you're worried about where the costs are going for that employee. But anyway, I don't know how often you'll use this, but it's here for you if you need to look it up. The next one is time badge information. Okay, again, I don't know how often you'll use this tab, but if you do need to use it, it'll be pretty critical. So my guess would be if you're using this tab, one of two things has happened. Either one, you have an employee who tries to use the clock and he can't because it doesn't recognize his badge number. And in that case, if you come to that employee in here, you'll probably see that he doesn't have any information in these fields, which means he's missing a key info type 50 in SAP. And that's the info type that drives the interaction between Kaba and SAP. So what this is showing me is on this employee's info type 50, here's his badge number, which should also be his employee number, which you can see here. And here's his absence attendance group. This should be the appropriate country. Otherwise, you're going to see absence and attendances that are for a different country, which wouldn't be a good thing. And the time zone, this is critical as well. So if you see an employee and every day he's coming in at, let's say, 6, and it's telling you that he came in at 7, then it could be that he has the wrong time zone, because this field is used to adjust what's the server time, and the server happens to be in Houston, to where the employee actually is. So in other words, when the employee clocks in, the system's recording the server time, which is Houston time. Then it looks at this time zone here and it does an adjustment based on where that time zone is. Okay, so the next one would be position information. Okay, on the position information, again, I don't know how often you're going to use this. It'll tell you his position. This happens to be pretty bogus, but it'd be welder or whatever his position might be, and then the job, which is a generic version of the position, and then his org unit. So obviously, if you're seeing this, it should be your org unit. If it's not, then probably you're looking at an employee who shouldn't be on your list. Okay, so the next one would be payroll information. Okay, this one I really don't think you're going to use, but in some cases you might. In particular, in Buffalo, this is the employees' pay scale and pay scale level, which drives a lot of things in Buffalo where it's a union shop. But for those of you not in a union shop, most likely you don't care too much about this, but it should always be payroll area 1B. If you're in Buffalo, this would be 1W. And then this is their pay scale group and level. Okay, so the last one on the list here is key times and payroll dates. Okay, again, this is probably not something you're going to use. If you're in the union in Buffalo, here's their birthday. So there are some things driven off birthday in the union. For those of you not in the union, most of this is probably not something you're too worried about. But it's really here for IT information. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to this working hours summary, which is probably something you might look at. Okay, now the important thing with this working hours summary is that you pick an appropriate date, and here's why. So you can see this week that I picked, there's no time for this employee, so it's showing me all zeros. So let's go back to week 40 here. Okay, now you can see it's showing me 200 hours, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And here's why. When I clicked on week 40, it picked every one of the days in that week. So the way that this calculation works is it takes Monday. Any day you click, it's the week to date hours on that day. So in this case, since I've selected multiple days, it's taking Monday. Plus on Tuesday is Tuesday plus Monday. So now it's Monday, Monday, Tuesday. And then Wednesday is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So when I've highlighted all three of these, it's now Monday, 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 Tuesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so forth. So by the time we get down here to Sunday, it's 7 Mondays, 6 Tuesdays, 5 Wednesdays, 4 Thursdays, 3 Fridays, etc. And that's how we get to 200. So when you're looking at this tab, it's important that you only pick one day. So most likely it's going to be Sunday that you're going to want to pick. So I'm going to pick Sunday here, and hopefully that'll bring us back to a reasonable hours summary. Okay, and so now that it's brought up Sunday, we can see we're back to 40 hours of regular and or training hours. So all this is going to give you is a breakdown. So if you have a guy who has 60 hours and you want to see, well, how does that break down? You can click on the Sunday of that week, and you can see how many of it is holiday, how many of it is absence, how many of it is regular and training, how much is overtime, 1.0, 1.5, and 2.0. Okay, so that's the employee data tabs. Now let's talk about what if you want to either review your employee's time, using the calendar, time data, or time events tabs, or you want to make edits. So I'm going to go ahead and close the employee data tab here. Okay, and doing that gives me a little more room to operate. So now these tabs are exactly the same three tabs that we saw during the message processing. You have your calendar, you have your time data where you're going to have the schedule and the time pair right underneath it. And then you have your time events, which is strictly just the clock punches. So first of all, if an employee comes in your office and asks you a question, you probably, first thing you want to do is obviously come to this view, pick the appropriate employee, and then pick the appropriate date. So with the dates over here, let's talk about this calendar. If it's just a particular day you want to look at, you can just click on any one of these days. So in this case, we're already clicked on the 9th. And remember, today's date is always highlighted with this square. Now, if I want to look at a range of days, let's just say it's a week, I can go ahead and click on the week number like this. Okay, and you'll notice when I click on the week number, it highlights the whole week. And down here in the calendar view, it's showing the whole week's worth of information. Also, if I went to the time data tab or time events tab, I would see these same days on those tabs. Now, let's say I don't want a whole week. Let's say I want 2 weeks. In that case, you can use your shift key. So you hold down shift, which I'm pushing right now, and then I would click between 2 days. So let's say I want from the 26th through the 9th. I can click those 2 days like that. That whole time I was holding down shift. Okay, and we can see now it's brought up those 2 weeks worth of days. And again, if I went to the time data tab or the time events tab, I would see those days there as well. Now, the other thing you might want to do is look at multiple employees at once, and you can do that. So in order to do that, you first click on this multi-person view. Okay, so you can see things slightly change during the multi-person view. With this view, it's pretty basic. You can only see one day at a time, but you could see multiple people. So say you have, a crew of employees who are supposed to be on the same shift and working the exact same times. You just want to review them to make sure they're all doing the same thing. You could come over here to your employee list. You can either hold down shift and click between two and it'll highlight everyone. Or if you want to pick and choose, you can click one, hold down control, and then pick the ones you want to see. So say it's these three. Then I would click this black arrow that says copy selected records. And it pushes those 3 employees across into my view. Now, it doesn't look like any of them were working on the day I've selected, but let's just say I pick a day in the week I was working in. So let's say Thursday the 6th of October. Okay, so in this case, I can see what's going on with these employees. So it looks like one of them was working right on schedule, the other one was on jury duty, and the third one was working on schedule as well. Now, if I want to scroll through the week, I can use these black arrows to go back and forth. So if I want to look at Friday, I just go to the next day. And here's Friday. I can see all three of them were working, and all three of them happen to be exactly on schedule in this scenario. So that's the multi-person view. It's pretty basic. It just allows you to look at multiple people for one day at a time. And you'll notice it's just the time data tab. So really, other than doing shift substitutions, which we'll get to in a minute, this really isn't a very good view for doing edits. It's just a good view for looking at multiple employees for one day at a time. Okay, so let me go back to the multi-day view, and let's talk about some things that you may be doing as far as editing without there being a message, which could happen often, whether it be because an employee just came to your office and told you made a mistake and time eval hasn't run yet, or it's something in the future, or it's something that just isn't going to generate a message. Okay, so back here on the multi-day view, I see I have an employee selected. So let's start by saying this first scenario. Let's say an employee comes in my office and says, hey, I clocked in this morning. I was doing 2 hours of training from, I don't know, whatever time, and I forgot to record it as training. So all I did was clock in and out. Can you help me out and set that time to be training? So let's say that just happened to be on October 7th, which we have selected here. So if I wanted to do that, I'm going to go to my time events tab. Okay, on the time events tab, I can see this employee works from 4 to 12:30 on the 7th. So I might ask him, okay, well, what times were you doing training? And let's just say he says, I came in at 4 and I was doing training from 4 to 6, and then the rest of the day I was working as my normal schedule. So you'll notice next to this attendance, or next to this clock punch, there's this attendance column here. So if I click into that and do the drop down, I get this pop-up showing me the two options, in this case, in this location I have for entering in attendance. So if I was in a union shop, I'd also see union paid time and union unpaid time here. Same exact procedure. It would just be two additional codes that you would see here. And if the employee was doing union time, obviously you would pick that code instead of training, which I'm going to choose here. So in this case, he's doing training, so I'm going to click training. Okay, and we can see that the attendance code has come in here. So now my issue is, what I'm telling the system is that from 4 to 12:30, he was doing training. Now he told me he was only doing training from 4 to 6. So now what I need to do is go and break up his day. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a P20 here. And I'm going to make it for 6 o'clock. And I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so we can see it reorders the punches for me. So in this case, now I've said he's on training from 4 to 6, but now I have 2 clock outs in a row, which is not something I want to have. So I need to put another clock in at 6 o'clock to say from 6 to 12:30, he was doing his normal working time. So I'm going to click into the free space again. I'm going to type my P10. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to enter 0600 again. Once I do that, I'm going to hit enter, and it'll reorganize again. Okay, so now what I've said, and this might be somewhat complicated, I understand that. If the employee had used the clock correctly, this is how the punches would have come in. He would have clocked in at 4 with the reason code training. He would have clocked in out at 6 to end his training and clocked immediately back in at 6. And without an attendance code, which says he's working his regular time, and then out again at 12:30 when he left. So that's what I've done here is I've entered from 4 to 6, he's doing training, and from 6 to 12:30, he's just doing his regular work, which is what we set out to do. Okay, so let's look at our next scenario, which is shift substitutions. So if you remember earlier in the video, I talked about how the premiums for night shift and afternoon shift are tied to the actual schedule, meaning if the employee is assigned to that schedule, regardless of the times he comes in and punches, he's going to get paid that premium. And from what I understand, if you ask a night shift employee, hey, next Monday I need you to come in and work the day shift for me because we have extra workload, we need to get it out by Monday morning, I need you to do me a favor, chances are you're going to have him come in and clock. You're going to leave him on the night shift. You might adjust his schedule time so you don't get errors, but you're not going to change his actual shift. He's still on the night shift, even though you're changing the clock times associated with it. You're still leaving him on that shift, and he should get the night shift, even though he's working in the middle of the day. Now, on the flip side, if you have a day shift employee and you've asked him, hey, can you come in on the night shift for a day or two, and you're going to probably want to pay him the premium because he's doing you a favor and he's working at nights. So let's go through how you handle shift substitutions. So in this case, let's use this employee and say on October 31st, which I'll click here, you want him to, instead of work the day shift, to work the night shift. Okay, so once it brings up the 31st, I'm going to want to go to my time data tab, which is where I would do all my shift substitutions. Okay, so I can see here this employee is normally scheduled to work from 4 in the morning to 12:30, which happens to be the day shift at this plant. Now, like I said, if I just want him to work the night shift and I don't want him to get paid the premium, or if this happened to be a night shift employee and I asked him to come in during the day and I want him to get the premium, then instead of doing a substitution, which I'm about to do, I could just go ahead and change the start and end time to be whatever times I want him to come in at. Now, by doing that, I'm leaving him on the shift he's assigned to and the premium he would or wouldn't get, and I'm changing the times I want him to come into, and that's it. Now, in this case, this guy's on the day shift. I want him to get the night shift premium, so I need to actually physically change the shift he's assigned to. How I do that is by double-clicking on the plan time here. So I'm going to double-click on plan. Okay, so you'll notice when I click on that, it brings up this detailed information down here, and on this first tab, the daily work schedule, it has the daily work schedule variant. So the first thing I want to do is say I want to do a substitution. So I do the drop down on this field. Okay, we'll see it brings it up, and I always want to pick this O2, which is shift substitution. Okay, so once that's popped in there, my next step is to enter the appropriate daily work schedule variant. So in this case, we can see he has a day shift as indicated by the D. If I do the drop down on this field, okay, so on this drop down, you'll notice the daily work schedules have a naming convention. So the first letter indicates whether it's an afternoon shift, which is A, D shift, which is a day shift, which is D, and a night shift, which begins with N. Then the second two digits indicate the number of hours in the shift, and then the last digit is just for variables. So you have your afternoon 8-hour 0, afternoon 8-hour 1, afternoon 8-hour 2, 3, 4. So there's multiple afternoon shifts that are 8 hours long. So what I'd like to do is just figure out, okay, I want to put them on the afternoon shift, and is it an 8-hour shift, a 10-hour shift, 9-hour shift? What is it? So let's say it's an 8-hour shift, and I want it to be from 15:15 to 23:30, or 15:30 to 23:30, let's say. So I would come down here until I find the 15:30, which happens to be this A84, and I'm going to double click that. Okay, so once I've selected that, you'll notice it now says A84, A084 in here. I hit enter. Hopefully it'll shift to 8-hour afternoon. Okay, and we can see now it's entered the schedule time from 15:30 to 23:30. So now on that day, on Monday, I put him on that afternoon shift. So in this case, he's going to come in and he's going to work the afternoon shift. He's going to get paid the premium. And then on Tuesday, he'd go back to his normally scheduled routine. Now, if you need to do this type of substitution for more than 1 or 2 or possibly 3 days, anything over 3 days for sure, you're not going to want to do it this way because obviously it's somewhat time consuming to do it 1 day at a time like this. So if you need to do it for a week or 4 days or 2 weeks or whatever it might be, in a longer period of time, there's a work schedule change form which you can use for both doing a short-term substitution or for permanently changing an employee's shift. And we'll go through that later on in this video. So anyway, once I've made this, as always, what I want to do is click save, and that'll save my change. Okay, once the data is saved, we can see in our message bar, data was saved. Okay, let's move on to our next scenario. Let's say I have an employee who I want to work through lunch, or I want to change his lunch break. So let's pick a different employee here. Okay, so on this employee, let's say on the 20th, so I'm going to go ahead and click on today. Okay, on the 20th, let's say I wanted this employee to, I asked him to work on a different break schedule. So in that case, I would come down. Again, I clicked on the plan time here, which we had already done on the last employee, so it already has this detailed tab up. But if it wasn't up, I would have just clicked on his plan time, like I did in the previous example. By double clicking this, it would bring up this for that day. So I just want to make sure I have the correct day, which in this case I have the 20th. Now here's his daily work schedule, where last time we substitute his daily shift. Now we don't want to do that. He's still working the same shift. All we want to do is say he's working a different break. So if I scroll over on these tabs here using this arrow, okay, we can see there's this breaks tab. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the breaks tab. Okay, and we can see here this employee is usually on break from 11 to 11:30, and it's a half an hour unpaid. Now, if I just wanted to change those times, I could change those times. I can also select a completely different break. So if I go in here again on the substitution type, just like I did for the full day substitution, I can do the drop down here. Okay, and when the window comes up again, I'll see 1, 2, and 3. I always want to choose 2, which is shift substitution. Okay, and once I do that, you'll see the O2 there. Now I can go ahead and change the break shift. So I'm going to do the drop down on this field. Okay, so we can see I have these options here. So if I told him, hey, just instead of doing your normal to 11:30, do 12 to 12:30 today, because I need you to get something done in the morning and then you can take your lunch. So if I wanted to do that, I could just go ahead and pick this 12 to 12:30. Now I'm going to go ahead and guess that most of the time that you ask a guy to work when he's supposed to be on his lunch break, you're probably telling him, look, just get whatever has to get done, and then whenever it's done, then go ahead and eat. So if that's what happens, then you might just want to use this NOBR, which is a no break schedule. So in that case, you tell him, look, whenever you're done, I'm going to put you on a no break, and whenever you're done, just clock out, eat lunch, and then clock back in when you're done. And in that case, he'll just get unpaid for the time that he was clocked out. And then when he clocks back in, he'll start getting paid again. So if that's what you choose to do, you just go ahead and pick the no break by double clicking it. Okay, and once that comes in, I can see now it's no break. Then I hit enter. Okay, so once it's saved, or once I've entered it, you'll notice it's now grayed out. I can go ahead and click save. Once I save it, I notice the data was saved message comes in here, so I'm good to go. I've successfully entered his break substitution. Now I just need to make sure that the employee does his clock out and clock back in during his lunch break. Okay, let's move on to our next scenario. Say I have an employee who comes to my office and says, hey, next Wednesday the 3rd or Thursday the 3rd, I'm going to be absent. I have jury duty. And I want to go ahead and enter that in here and be proactive about it. So I can come in here for this employee, make sure obviously you have the right employee selected, click on November 3rd. Okay, once November 3rd comes up, I can go ahead and close this details section. So I'm not going to use that for this. Okay, so once that closes, it'll show me the normal time data tab with 1 day selected because I've only selected the 3rd. I'm going to go ahead and click this blue button to expand it. Okay, so once it's expanded, you'll notice I have this free space. And if you remember back to when we were doing the message processing, when I had the message, the employee's not at work, this is the exact same process I'm going to use here to enter an absence. So in order to do it, I use the free white space underneath the schedule time, click into it, do the drop down. Okay, and the drop down displays all the available absences. In this case, the guy's telling me he's on jury duty. So I'm going to go ahead and pick jury duty. If it was one of the others, obviously I would pick the appropriate absence. Okay, so we can see here the absence has come in. If I go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so once it comes up, it shows me jury duty paid, and it's 8 hours is the default, as we saw before. And you'll notice it changed the guy's 10-hour schedule to be an 8-hour schedule. So in this case, since it's a full day, I'm good to go. I can click save. As you saw in the prior examples when we were doing the messaging, I could also enter partial day absence, in which case I'd want to enter the times. So if he told me he was, in this case, say it was a doctor's appointment instead of jury duty, but he was only going to be there from, I don't know, from 5, and then he was done with his doctor's appointment at 10, Then I would enter from 5 to 10, he's on sick, whether it's paid or unpaid, and then the rest of it would remain the same. Okay, so once I've entered this full day absence, I'm going to go ahead and click save. And once it saves, it tells me data was saved. Okay, let's move on to our next scenario. Let's say an employee comes to you and he says, hey, I clocked in or I clocked out at such and such a time, but I had really been here earlier, or I decided to stay later after I had already clocked out, something along those lines. So let's just pick a day, let's say on the 27th for this employee. Okay, so once it brings up the 27th, it shows me, as usual, on this time data tab, his plan time and his scheduled time. So let's say, in this case, he actually came in at 4, but he didn't clock in. So I asked him to come in at 4. He came right in. He totally forgot to clock in because it's out of his routine. He just went straight to work. And then when everyone else started clocking in, he realized, oh, I haven't clocked in yet, which is probably not a very realistic scenario because he would need to clock in order to clock on activities. And if you asked him to come in at 4 and he didn't realize it till 5, then that means he was sitting there doing nothing, which wouldn't be a good thing. But let's just go with it for the sake of argument. So let's say we have to edit a clock punch. I'm going to go to the time events tab because that's where we can edit clock punches. Once I'm on the time events tab, I can see my in and my out, and I have the fields are white for me to edit. So going with the example we've laid out here, which again may not make much sense, the employee's come to my office and he said I was here at 4. I forgot to clock in. I didn't clock in until 5, which could be a scenario that happens. Hopefully it wouldn't be a whole hour. It might be 10, 15 minutes. But usually they're going to figure out that they haven't clocked in when they go to work on their first activity and the clock makes them clock in order to clock onto an activity. So in this case, we're going to go to the clock in. I'm going to click in on the time. And I'm going to simply change it from 5 to 4. And then, as always, I'm going to save that change. Okay, I'm going to see my data was saved with the check. Everything looks good. And again, I apologize for the example not being the best, but in this case, all I'm trying to get across is in this the time data maintenance view, you have the ability on the time events tab to correct clock punches on any day. So if an employee comes to your office and tells you whatever has happened, and you need to correct clock punches, you would do exactly what I just did. Go to the day, go to the time events tab, pick the appropriate clock punch, and edit it as necessary. Okay, the next example I want to talk about is for premiums. And for most locations, the only premium outside of the shift premium, which we've already discussed in detail, is a lead premium. So some employees are the lead for their group, and they act kind of like somewhere in between a supervisor and an employee. They're running a crew below the supervisor, and they get paid some sort of premium for every hour they work, whether it's $1 or $2, it depends on the location. So in that case, what we want to do, let's say our lead guy is out, and we have another guy who's taking his place for the week, and we want to pay him the premium for the time that he's doing that job. So in that case, let's say this employee we already have chosen, the week number 44, he's going to be the lead guy because the other guy is on vacation. So I'm going to go ahead and click on week 44. Okay, once I'm there, I'm going to go to the time data tab because I'm on the time events tab, and that's only for clock punches. And in this case, I'm doing something other than clock punches. Okay, so on this time data tab, just like I was going to enter an absence, I'm going to expand the days. So let's say just on Monday and Tuesday, this guy's going to be the lead guy because my normal lead guy is out and I want to pay him the premium. So I'm going to expand Monday, and I'm going to expand Tuesday. Okay, so once the 2 days are expanded, I'm going to go ahead and enter the lead premium. And I do that just like I would enter an absence. So I'm going to click in the free space. I'm going to do the drop down. Okay, so once I get the drop down, I want to go down to the sections that start with Z. So I'm going to use the scroll bar here to get down further, and I see here's my options for Z. So we have first aid premium, labor grade transfer, which is only going to be for the union, and so is the first aid premium. Here's my lead man. So lead man is what I want to enter. So I'm going to double click on Z LED. Okay, we'll notice it puts the Z LED in the field. I'm going to go to the duration field. I'm going to enter a 1. Okay, now it doesn't matter what number you enter in here. If you enter in 10, it's not going to pay him 10 lead man premiums, but it is crucial that you enter at least a 1, and I don't know why you'd enter any other number because it's not going to have any effect. So just enter a 1, but don't forget, because if you don't enter that, he's not going to get paid. So just make sure you enter that 1, and then you can hit enter. Okay, and we can see once it loads up, it has my lead premium, and the 1 is still there. Now, if I want to do Tuesday as well, I can do the exact same process I just did. Since I already know the premium is ZLED, I'm not going to do the drop down. I'm just going to type ZLED. And then I'm going to go to the duration field, and I'm going to enter my 1. Okay. Okay, and once it saves, it tells me my data was saved. Now for your employees who are lead man permanently, you're going to see this same line on every single day in this time data view for those employees. If you have an employee who isn't a lead man and they're going to be a lead man, instead of doing what I just did is only for temporary changes. If you have a permanent change, you're going to want to contact your HR rep and tell them, hey, from this date forward, this employee is going to be the lead man. Please enter that into the system. Then they can enter it in through their HR tools, and then it will show up on every single day. But as a supervisor, you only have the access to do it on a daily basis. So clearly, if you have a guy making a permanent change, you're not going to want to have to do that every day. So that's the plan of action there, is to go to your HR rep if it's a permanent change. But in the event of a temporary change, you're going to do the steps I just did for every day where the employee is going to be the lead man. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about with Time Manager's Workplace is how you can back up another supervisor. Most of the time, you're probably going to be on the message processing view, so I'm going to go there. Again, I'm going to go to Menu, go to Process Messages. Okay, so once I'm on the message processing screen, as you can see, I still have no messages for my employees. Let's say I have a supervisor who's asked me to do his work for processing messages while he's on vacation for the week. So if that was the case, I want to be his backup. And the way to do that is I come to this button down here with the 2 little people on it, and I do the drop down. Okay, and in this drop down list, I have several things. For you, you'll probably just have a couple, and you'll see this backup select supervisors org unit, and that's the one we want to choose in this case. Okay, so by clicking on that button, it pops up this choose organizational unit window for me to look at. Now, if you don't know the employee's org unit number, which hopefully you do, then you're going to have to dig through this to find where the org unit is. So this is a bogus org structure, so I'm not going to do that. But if you had to do that, you would go ahead and start drilling down through these arrows into the appropriate org unit until you got down far enough on the ladder to the org unit of the supervisor you're looking to back up. Like I said, hopefully you know the employee's or the supervisor's org unit number or name, and then you can do a search. So I'm going to do that by clicking these binoculars here. Okay, and it's going to let me search by either the org unit, the person, or the position. Obviously, I'm going to pick the org unit by either double clicking it or clicking the check mark since it's already highlighted. Okay, once the search window comes up, I'm going to go ahead and enter in the org unit number. And I'm going to click Start Search. Okay, and we can see here it's brought up the org unit I was searching for. I'm going to double click that. Okay, so now it's brought up my org unit. I'm going to click the checkbox next to it. Okay, once it's checked, I'm going to hit the check mark at the bottom. Okay, and here I have the messages for the other supervisors' employees, and I could edit them the same way or handle them the same way that I've handled my own.